Are we happy with the seating arrangements? Everybody comfortable? Yeah. Why is there a gap over there? What's happening? Thank you so much. Yeah, no, she doesn't. Let me just put this one down. 1, 2, and 2. Keep this one. I'm just going to introduce the next panel, but I think, as you can see from the screen, the moderator is Mapule, she's continuing, and then we do have Nazim Teboho and Carissa isn't here, as well as Victoria De Mello. We do have a third panelist, Teboho, yeah. So, okay, I shall introduce the session for you, describe what it's about, and what we're gonna do. Lunch is meant to be an hour, but because everybody wants to be able to, like, have everything on, I get it. Even me, I wish I could stay here the whole day and engage longer. We're gonna have to then compromise on lunch. We're gonna have to eat quicker, make it half an hour, so that we can be able to engage. Hopefully we can agree on that one. So, fantastic. So let me just introduce this session quickly. All right, this is bound to be interesting, like all of them. It's looking at the nature and impact of the financialization of food systems and the transformation of agriculture, agro-processing, and value chains. The objectives of this session is to provide important angles on the implications of greater financial activity within the agricultural sector, the money, right? That's where it's at. So I think I will let the people who know best talk. And probably this is when we all want to talk in the question and answer session. So for this session, in the question and answer session, we can take 2 rounds, but make the questions short, not long, guys. Mapule, you ready? Thank you so much. Please give them a round of applause.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Well, it's me again. So, I mean, this conversation or this next panel dovetails on the earlier conversations that we've held this morning and yesterday. So this will be very specific to the work that the panelists are representing. I mean, on the far hand, we have our partner, Teboho, who comes from the Center for Competition Regulation and Development. So he will share some of the work that they're doing under the Fair for All project and how it's linked to these discussions of linking the value chains discussions and looking at the barriers of entry to markets for women, etc. So we'll start off with you.
Presentation up.
I did forward it to you.
Should I just present from my laptop?
Yes, you may.
But it won't show.
It's fine. Sorry about that.
That's fine. Sure, thanks, Mapule, and hi, everyone. So I am Teboho. I'm a researcher with the Center for Competition, Regulation, and Economic Development that's based at the University of Johannesburg. So we are partners with OXFAM, and we have conducted a couple of studies on different value chains, right? Looking at the issues around barriers to entry, challenges facing SMEs, and what opportunities exist for SMEs, given that context, given that many of these value chains are tightly contested and highly concentrated, right? And the value chains that we focused on, it's poultry, vegetables, wine. In this particular presentation, I'm going to present findings from the poultry sector, but there are cross-cutting issues that also speak to the vegetables and speak to the wine industry, right? Oh, is it? You can't hear me? Oh, sorry. How is it now? Yeah. Is it better? Oh, okay. Thanks. So there's a presentation. Unfortunately, can't put it up, but I'll just go through it from my laptop. So as I've said, we for this particular one, it's the one that looks into the poultry industry, right? The production of chicken, the production of eggs, right? What are the challenges for SMEs? How is the value chain structures? Where does the power lie? Who controls what? And what's the implication for participation of SMEs, particularly women-run SMEs, right? So some of the key questions that we wanted to ask is, of course, around those key barriers to entry, and what are the implications to improve policy for SMEs participation. The kind of approach that we took, the conceptual approach, is the one that links three concepts, essentially. One is value chain governance, two is barriers to entry, and the third one is upgrading. And this has enabled us to properly contextualize the form and the magnitude of the challenges that face some of these SMEs within the value chains that they participate. And we took sort of a case study approach where we engaged directly with the farmers and the other key stakeholders, including the funders, right? So just to give you a background to the poultry industry, a brief one, right, in the South African case, right? So there are two main products of the poultry industry, and that's chicken, meat, and eggs, right? 75% of that output is for meat, chicken meat, and 25% is for eggs, right? So this is quite an important industry in the scheme of the bigger things, right? It contributes about 16% to the overall gross value of the agricultural value of the agricultural sector, right? And the combined farm income is around 62 billion, which is leading, right, followed by beef and milk, right? But importantly, chicken or poultry is the cheapest source of protein, right? And the most consumed animal protein in South Africa, right? And it speaks to the issue of food security and accessibility as well, right? In terms of the structure, this is a highly concentrated industry, tightly controlled by a few large companies, right? So the key players we divide them in terms of three tiers, right, of production. There's tier one, which is large commercial producers. There's tier two, which is small and medium commercial producers. And then there's tier three, which is largely non-commercial producers, right? Majority of production comes from tier one, large commercial producers, right? On the meat production side, right, and even on the egg production side, there's about three players, large players, control more than 60% of the entire output of the value chain, three firms, right? And they're typically integrated along the value chain. What that means is that they produce the key inputs, they control some of the facilities along the value chain, and they control the key markets and the key routes to markets, right? The way that the value chain is divided is got several stages, right? There's stage one, which is the production of grandparent stock, right? So grandparent stock is what you see in the market when you see SMEs and women carrying boxes of day-old chicks, small chickens, right? That's at stage four. There are other stages that come before that, right? The parent stock stage is where the key producers, right, import parent stock from the international companies. We don't have parent stock production, great parent stock production in South Africa. So we import that and then we multiply that into parent stock and then multiply that as well into the production of fertilized eggs. And then that's when we see the day-old chicks that we see in the market, right? That level of the value chain is controlled by three players because they are the only ones that have exclusive licenses to import the breeding stock material, essentially, right? Not only that, they are then forward integrated into the end markets, right? So they control how much is brought into the country and how it is distributed into the country, into the market, essentially, right? So you have those stages, and then you have a stage, the stage that I'm talking about, which is the production of day-old chicks. That's where you then tend to see participation, you then tend to see a lot of activity in terms of the production of chickens, right? From that stage on, then there's the production of the rearing of the chickens for meat, right? And that's where many of the SMEs and the women-run enterprises participate as chicken growers, right? But also as egg producers, right? Now, when these chickens, when these day-old chicks are brought into the market, they are either grown to produce meat, or they are either grown to produce eggs, right? So you have participants at the different segments, right? And then we have almost like the last stage, which is the slaughter services stage in case of the meat production, slaughter services, and then as well as the actual production of eggs on the layer side, right? So the entire value chain, in terms of all those stages that I've presented, tightly controlled by a few large companies, right? Now, we then went into to look at the different barriers to entry that affect the participation of SMEs in these different stages and in the different segments of the value chain. And we identified 4, right? And of course, there are many other challenges, but this, we thought these are the main or the key, rather, barriers to entry, right? And the first one is around high capital requirements, right? Linked to the issue of limited access to finance, right? The second one is around the issue of access to markets. The third one is access to production inputs. And then there's also the fourth one, which has always been there, but has not been brought to the fore, right? Which is the role of networks, right? How this can enable participation, but at the same time can serve as a form of a barrier to entry. And I will explain shortly, right? In terms of capital requirements, poultry production is a highly capital intensive production at the commercial level, right? And the costs of setup are quite high, right? And setup involves, is at the core of it, the construction of chicken houses, the infrastructure, right? That is quite expensive, right? So for instance, it costs about, to build a chicken house, it costs about 300 rands per chicken. That's how they classify the costs, right? Per chicken capacity, meaning a 10,000 to build a 10,000 capacity chicken house, right? It costs about 300 rands per chicken, right? So what that means is that a 10,000 capacity chicken house will cost about 3 million to build, essentially, right? And then you have other costs. Now, after building the chicken houses, you have to fill them up, right? And some of these costs, we tend to take them for granted, but they are actual. To fill a 10,000 capacity chicken with layer chickens, right? Each layer chicken costs on average around 100 rands, right? Meaning, as an SME, you must have 10 million to fill that chicken after building it, right? If you are building a 10,000 capacity chicken house. But then linked to those high costs, or rather before I get to there are also compliance costs, right? And this is what we think there needs to be an intervention here, and I'll speak to that later on, right? The compliance costs, and this is just the cost related to setting up, right? Over and above the housing costs, over and above the stocking costs, right? And this relates to environmental impact assessments, the EIAs, the facilities that are required, the EXCOM connections, the transformers and all that. Those can be quite expensive. From our sample, they can cost in excess of 300,000, right? Depending on the capacity of the farm, right? Linked to these issues of high capital requirements, you then have limited access to funding. And this is a problem across the economy at large, and I think we'll all know that, right? Specific to this case, to the poultry industry, some of the issues that they've raised, that were raised, is that the main issue is the requirements from the financial institutions, and this includes our development finance institutions, right? Track record, security, own contribution, right? And I think the issue of own contribution comes out quite strongly, right? While many of these entrepreneurs that run these SMEs, right, know how to run the operations, when they go and apply for finance, particularly from our development finance institutions. They are required to have own contribution, which is what they call skin in the game, right? Show us what you have as a form of commitment. If we're going to give you 50 million, can you pop out 5 million, right? Many black women entrepreneurs don't have that, lying somewhere, right? So that becomes a barrier itself, because it means that you cannot be approved for funding because you can't show, or they consider it a form of commitment, right? But I think that's an area where we need to begin to think about what are, given these constraints, what are other creative ways in which the financial institutions can consider as a form of commitment other than the strict financial sort of considerations, right? So that's on issues of finance and high capital requirements. There's also the issue of access to production inputs, right? And this one is just said in a sense that the main production inputs into poultry is feed and the breeding stock, right? Feed constitute about 70% of the overall production costs, right? But the problem is that the cost of feed disproportionately affects the SMEs and the women-run SMEs, right? And from our research, for instance, an SME or a non-commercial SME that is in the layer production, it costs them about R1.63 to feed a chicken per day, right? The commercial counterpart, it costs them a fraction of about 62 cents, using the same feed, the same quality of feed, right? I mean, you can get the impact on the small players. We've already spoken about the issues of limited capital that they have, right? Now, the cost of the inputs and the cost of feed on them is just too much compared to their commercial counterparts. And this is largely because they're not able to take advantage of the economies of scale, right? The feed that they buy, even though it's the same quality of feed from the same producer, they buy bagged feed because they buy in small quantities, right? They don't buy in tonnages like big companies. So they have to incur as well the packaging costs that go with that. Hence why you see these costs being disproportionate like that. Similarly, even on the cost of day-old chicks, the cost of the point-of-lay chickens, right? But even besides the cost, there's also an issue with just mere accessibility to the production inputs, right? What we get is that the non-commercial producers in particular, during the peak seasons where they have high demand, like your December seasons where many of us eat quite a lot of chicken and meat, right? They simply cannot get a supply of day-old chicks, right? I mean, I'll give an example, right? One a woman farmer that we interviewed in Limpopo for the December period that we just coming from, said that she was supposed to, with her demand, she was supposed to have 3,000 chickens in her house, right? But she could only get 1,000 chickens, right? So there's seemingly this, because they don't have control of the production of the day-old chicks, right? Remember, I outlined the different stages, right? The production of day-old chicks is also controlled by the large players, right? So during the peak seasons, they prioritize their own in-house production. Remember, I said they are vertically integrated. So they produce the day-old chicks for in-house production because they also produce meat and chicken, right? But then they also sell the extra to the market. So during peak seasons, what they do is that they prioritize, obviously, their own in-house production, and therefore, you find that the small-scale farmers don't have anywhere to get the day-old chicks, right? And then there's an issue of access to market, right? And this one is quite important also, based on the discussions that were had yesterday, right? So for the poultry products, there are three main routes to market. It's the national retailers, the Shoprite, the Pick and Pays, and the Woolworths. And then you have the independent chain stores, such as the cash and carries, the butcheries, and that, right? And then you have the third one, which many non-commercial users use, which is the direct supply to the consumers, right? So the non-commercial producers tend to sell directly to individuals, live chickens, eggs, and that, right? Now, The first one, which is the national retail, right, it's the major route to market, and this is across the fast-moving consumer goods spectrum, including the poultry products, right? So it's tightly controlled by the few large producers that I mentioned, to the extent that this direct supply to the consumers, right, although it is lucrative and the margins are quite high, right, for the informal and non-commercial producers, it's quite limited in terms of the numbers that you can push and sell, right, as an informal producer, right? But beyond that, there's also, with the formal retail, there's also the issue of minimum volume requirements, right? The small-scale producers don't have the capacity to meet the minimum requirements that are required by the national retailers or the big retailers. And we have some of the minimum requirements from our research that we got, right? For instance, in the egg industry, they mentioned the values around between 7,200 to 36,000 eggs per week, right, as minimum requirements. What that means is that in order to be able to supply that, a small-scale farmer should have at least 2 chicken houses, each with a capacity of 40,000 chickens, right? Now, given the cost structure that I outlined earlier on, those chicken houses cost in millions to build, right? So they don't have that capacity to supply, which is why I was actually interested in the discussion around Hello Choice and the initiative that the guys are having, right? So, but even in the case where some of them have the capacity to supply, there are also other stringent supply requirements, listing requirements that have to be met with the national retailers, right? And the compliance issues in that regard, right? Sure. And then there's also the issue of the networks, right? Networks play an important role in this industry. It's about who you know, right, if you want to go further. And they have been important to assist some of the SMEs in order to get some of the opportunities, right? Access to market, access to finance and that, right? But they have played out in other forms where the incumbent large producers have these strong relationships and personal relationships with the key customers, right? Your key national retailers, to an extent that they use that relationship strategically to block entry that they see as a potential competition in future. Maybe not now. There is an entrant, there is Tebo who's coming into the market. I'm not a threat at this particular stage, but they see that potentially I could be a threat to them, and then they influence, using that relationship, they influence the key customer to essentially not give me space, right? And what they typically will tell me is that, look, right now we don't have capacity to take on more supply, right? But if audits were to be done, you'd find that that's not the case, right? That's because there's these dynamics and personal relationships that happen there, right? So I'll just wrap up in terms of the opportunities that we have identified and the areas of interventions, right? So, and there are 3 opportunities, and this is through contract farming, right? The first one. And the master plan, which is a government initiative in partnership with the private sector, the industry, the South African Poultry Association, is pushing this issue of transformation and bringing in or commercializing the non-commercial producers, right, using contract farming. And the contract farming is an arrangement where a small-scale farmer gets into the supply of the large-scale producer, right? And then the large-scale producer then markets that product, right? That's a great opportunity, and I think it's a welcome one. But there are challenges around that. There's quite a lot of exploitation around that, right? There's quite a lot of margin squeeze. So what the large companies will then tell the small companies is they give them production inputs, right? And then the small-scale producers will then produce and then sell the produce to the large producers. But the price that they get hinders their growth, right? To the extent that some that we have spoken to have decided to get out of this contract and say, this is not beneficial for me if I wanted to grow. But if I'm just someone who doesn't want to grow, that's fine and want to learn. But for some of the entrepreneurs that are ambitious and want to grow, right, the conditions within those contracts does not allow them. And this is quite important because there is a real drive from the private sector and government to bring in transformation through contract farming. And as they are implementing this, it is important to take into consideration some of these contractual issues because they also have potentially violating competition laws because they restrict the small-scale farmer where they can buy inputs, right? That's potentially in violation of competition laws, right? And then there's opportunity through aggregation. I think this one was spoken about yesterday, and I think we need to find ways in which it can be applied in the meat production sector as well, right? I think, given the knowledge, I think there are some ways in which it can be applied, right? There's also opportunity through industry awareness. What we realize is that some of the small-scale producers are just not aware of the dynamics in the industry. Where to get what, where to get financing, some of the financing incentives that are present within government and within the private sector, right? And then the three interventions. At the feed level, right, we think that if there's going to be meaningful transformation in this sector and meaningful participation of SMEs, right, there's need to intervene at the feed level, right? Through probably establishing state-funded feed mills, right? Now, a feed mill itself is a highly capital-intensive activity, right? However, the public-private partnerships can be explored in that. Our research and our engagements with...
Sorry, Debo, we have a minute.
Huh?
Yeah.
Sure. And then as well as at the slaughterhouses, at the compliance level, the low-hanging fruit is to be deliberate about financing the environmental impact assessments, the compliance-related issues. That should not be a barrier in this day, right? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Debo, for breaking it down for us. This research paper or report will be made available online on their website and also on OXFAM South Africa's website. So you'll be able to engage with them, and there are going to be upcoming forums in relation to engaging with CRED with respect to the research findings. I think following how you ended in terms of looking at the opportunities, I think I'd like to give a Jobs Fund an opportunity. You can talk from where you're sitting. What are the opportunities that are available for the respective groups that we've spoken about?
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks.
Before I start, let me just convey the apologies of the head of the Jobs Fund, Najwa Ali Idris. Previous engagements prevented her from attending these deliberations. And from my colleague Mfundo at the back there and myself, you know, we need to thank you. You know, sometimes you're involved in your work to such an extent that you actually lose the bigger picture. You don't lift up your head to actually look at these things. So you've brought that back to us, and I think all of us sometimes needs a bit of motivation to actually understand why it is important to do what you do. So thank you all. Now, the Jobs Fund was established in 2011 as a unit of National Treasury. And the purpose of the Jobs Fund was not to fund industries like the Department of Agriculture would fund agricultural projects, etc. We were funded or established to test models because there was an understanding at Treasury at the time that current models or current implementation strategies was not working. They were blunt instruments in effect. They lacked innovation. And you know what they say about a mad person knocking his head against the wall every day, right? It simply was not working. And basically to get an idea of how to address the barriers in various sectors, to unlock those barriers and then create jobs within various industries. Now, the Jobs Fund is structured as a challenge fund. For those of us who don't know what that means is we are not allowed to accept ad hoc applications. We open a call, what we call a call for proposals, into the market in general. People apply in terms of that call for proposals. We do the appraisals of the various proposals based on preset criteria, which is published, and we present proposals to an independent investment committee, all right? Who actually doesn't work at the Trust Fund. We actually don't approve any projects ourselves. The investment committee, who is independent, approves all grant awards to various parties. Now, the Jobs Fund does not fund individual businesses necessarily, because we don't hold ourselves out to be experts in the various sectors, in the various geographies, and so forth. So what we look for are intermediaries who are active within certain sectors, certain geographies, fund those intermediaries so that they can help various, in this case, farmers, households, within the various geographies that they're active in. And I think you would agree with me, if we were to fund individual businesses, we would need a team much bigger than our 52 current staff complement that we do have. And let me stress, we are not in competition with other funders, DFIs, IDC, NEF, etc., Land Bank. We are not in competition with the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Social Development. We are there to test the innovation and complement what they are currently doing. So what have we delivered up to the end of March? We were capitalized at 9 billion 11 years ago. Part of that, of course, went to the administration of the fund. We have funded or contracted 162 projects. To date, about 6 billion of the 8 billion allocated to the projects has been spent already. We have unlocked 12 billion rand, over and above what we were allocated from the private sector, other government sectors, to complement ours funding. So in effect, our project has spent in the region of 18 billion to date. We have 46 of the 162 projects were agriculture projects. It is by far the biggest part of our portfolio, makes up about a third of the overall portfolio. We have supported via our interventions just over 16,000 farmers. Now, I don't know what to call them anymore. We used to call them smallholder farmers 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Then people said, no, you shouldn't call them that. You should call them emerging farmers, and people are not keen on that anymore. So now the new term is new era farmers. So I'm going to stick to emerging farmers. Because, you know, you offend people when you go into an area and you speak and you use the wrong term. So my apologies, if that's the case. So in doing that, our projects are contracted to produce 74,000 permanent and seasonal jobs, 18,500 short-term jobs, and contracted to train 55,000 individual beneficiaries, as we would call them. Most of those has been achieved. The achievement, obviously the projects are continuing. We've achieved in excess of 80% of those targets to date already. Now, what type of models have we funded, right? We funded blended finance across the spectrum, basically, blended finance projects, skills development, business development, and I want to differentiate between business development and skills development. Many farmers we have found, especially those who grow up on farms, right? They know how to farm, but they have no idea about the business of farming, right? So that is why we clearly differentiate. We require all our projects to have well-defined business development skill programs within their projects, so that we can have a holistic development of our farming beneficiaries. We have funded access to value chains and various crops, right, across the spectrum. Vegetables, short-term crops like vegetables, annual crops like grains, maize, wheat, soya, whatever, and then long-term agriculture crops, citrus, we've done sugar, citrus, deciduous fruits, the various deciduous fruits, including apples, blueberries, is, by the way, as we heard, we've got a project that funds and assists wine farmers as part of the deciduous fruit program, and I'm happy to provide the details of the partner that is implementing that project. But I think, following on what Tebogo was talking about, And I think all of these projects, given that we're testing innovation, given that we're learning, what have we learned? And I think that's the key for Jobs Fund, because I'll tell you, 9 billion sounds a lot of money, right? You apply that to the problem that we have, and it's not a lot of money, right? What have we learned? So the problem statement, and I think Teboho spoke to most of these, is pretty much hasn't really changed over the last 10 years for a farmer. Land and infrastructure, access to finance, markets, skills, and development, skills development programs, etc. Those were typically, I mean, you could in various, and there are maybe 1 or 2 additional issues, but those are generally the issues faced by farmers, right? Or new emerging farmers. But I think the one thing we learned to our cost is that emerging farmers is not an homogeneous group of people. They're not all the same. A lady farmer in Limpopo, the issue she is facing is very different to one in the Eastern Cape, to the Northern Cape, etc. And the problem at the moment is many packages of support treats them as an homogeneous group, so it doesn't deal with the issues that is faced by those individuals. So from that we've learned once of interventions, like providing somebody with land. It's not enough, right? When you provide somebody with land, but you don't teach them how to farm properly, profitably, you don't provide them with skills development, you don't provide them with access to water, you're actually setting them up for failure by doing that. So it has to be a package of support that's being provided to farmers. It has to be a package of support crafted based on the needs of that particular farmer, not a general one that applies to everybody and you choose what you want to use. It has to be crafted for that particular individual. Support cannot be an event, right? A farmer cannot be given a seed and say, you're good to go, let's go, right? A farmer needs constant support. We have had projects over 4 years where we've supported people over 4 years. And even then, we haven't completed the process, right? Mentorship, for argument's sake. Mentorship is key. And I know a lot has been said about commercial farmers, right? The point, though, is that the skills, whether we like it or not, the skills that is required to develop emerging farmers in many cases is in the white farmer next door, right? And to get, you've achieved something. When you can get that white farmer next door to come and mentor these black farmers. And let me tell you, we have had huge success in doing that, right? Of course, some of them don't want to. Well, then fine, we'll move to the next one, right? The problem that we've also seen is that the response from government or institutions, not necessarily only government, right? Institutions as well, who assist farmers, is that response is uncoordinated. We have often had a case where young people tell us, we want to farm, we've got access to community land, but where do we go, right? So that means that the response is not well coordinated, it's not what advocated, right? Where does he go? Or she, where does she go for assistance? If she doesn't know, well, then you can have the best plans, it doesn't matter. Government's response is often linked to formalization. If you remember in the COVID schemes, there was a case about you need financials, you need to be registered for tax, etc., etc., etc. We're saying, well, that defeats the purpose, right, of developing an informal economy. And we at the Jobs Fund, we recognize the need for certain levels of farmers to be registered for tax because we need to widen our tax base, right, so that more people can be assisted. But we see it as part of the process to help that farmer grow and thereby lead to formalization, as opposed to requesting formalization firstly before you can actually apply for the funding. And then for us, the biggest issue at the moment, whether you talk about farming, you talk about anything basically, whether you're talking about assisting in youth service activities, for argument's sake, is the capacity on the ground. We worked out, if government announced tomorrow, we're making 20 billion rand available for all emerging farmers, guess what? you don't have a mechanism for spending the money. How are you going to get that money into the hand of the farmer on the ground at local level? You don't have the capacity. So we believe that organizations like yourself, many of the organizations I've met here, needs to be funded first so that we can develop capacity on the ground so that we can actually use them as a vehicle to assist the farmers. Without that, I don't know. But listen, that's not easy, right? All right? Before you think that's an easy thing, that is a very, very difficult thing to do. Then, funding. Tebogo spoke about funding. Funding must be appropriate. And I'm talking about interest rate, I'm talking about the structure of the funding. You cannot provide a deciduous fruit farmer with funding that requires him to pay back in a year's time. Because he's not going to earn any money in the next year. He's going to earn money in 5 years' time. So it has to be appropriately structured to help those farmers. Risk perceptions, Tebogo spoke about it. How are these applications assessed, right? Risk, agriculture in general is viewed as a high-risk industry. Small farmers, much more so. Now, the idea here is that we need systemic change. You cannot simply, this lady in the front here, very impressive, spoke to me about her plans for her business. We need to change the risk perception related to her. Anybody, you go for a home loan, right? And you go and they give you a rate and you repay the loan. The risk perception when you go for your next loan is not the same as when you went the first time, because you now have a credit history of paying back. That doesn't apply to small farmers. You will always be a high risk. Whether you paid back 10 loans or not is completely irrelevant. The problem is financial institutions, including the Land Bank, including the IDC, have credit policies that is not developmental. And even if they do, can you imagine sitting in a credit committee meeting? Some farmer who's never farmed in their life comes along and says, I want R1 million to build chicken coops. So now there's a risk, right? So the members of the credit committee will always revert to the original credit policy, simply for fear of making the wrong decision. So until we have a change in mindset on all of that, there will always be a problem in raising funds. So we need that systemic change. We need credit policies to change. Look at the Land Bank, for argument's sake. The Land Bank has a credit policy to develop young farmers. They have to do it as part of the Land Bank Act, right? The problem is the Land Bank raises money in the market. So how does the Land Bank raise money in the market at 12%, which is the government rate, by the way, or 10%, and then lend money to a farmer? They will lose money every year, and you've seen the issues that is now prevalent in the Land Bank. That issue that's currently there has been coming for the last 10 years. So unless you fix the models of the development finance institutions, they are not able to give you a loan at 5%. Because they're losing money, they're going to go out of business very soon if they do that. And then land. Let me give an example. We funded a project in the Northern Cape. Those people, yes, those people received land in the tricameral system 84, right? But that's not the point. The point is, when we funded the development of the land for raisins, or for grapes to produce raisins, they still did not have land tenure. That is 16, 20, 35 years later, there was no land tenure. So how you give somebody land is very important. If they don't have land tenure, they cannot use the land to raise money. Because the land is actually not theirs. They have right of use. That's it. They cannot use it to raise money. It limits the growth of that person. So we need to be very careful. 1 minute, right?
Please wrap up, Nazim.
Eh?
Thank you. Please wrap up.
Okay. Water rights. By the way, I'm helping somebody on cannabis, right? To get a water license is going to cost him to pay a consultant 944,000 rand. That comes from the requirements of the Department of Water and Sanitation, right? So what do you want this guy to do? He's never farmed, he hasn't any money, but he must pay that. So it's a catch-22, and then access to markets, off-takes. And here I want to touch on what, say, right? We have had in our projects very good support from the likes of SPAR, Pick and Pay, that's very good. The problem is you cannot give them something they can't sell, right? So what do you want to do? The point is, it's very difficult for a Pick n Pay to engage an individual farmer. So let's say there's 200 farmers in a region. Pick n Pay cannot engage 200 farmers, right? That is why we are a big proponent of aggregation. Pick n Pay must have one place to go to, right? Aggregation helps your cost benefits. It gives you cost benefits because you can buy for cheaper if you aggregate. You need less equipment because you aggregate your services. And then we need to look at how we break the monopoly of premium markets. And when I say premium markets, I am not talking about Pick n Pay. A farmer, deciduous farmer, will earn 3 times for the same apple, 3 times, right? To what he sells to Woolworths, to what he exports internationally. We need to break that cycle because that cycle is controlled by a handful of marketing agencies in South Africa. You need to break that cycle, then you're going to achieve profitability at Apple. A guy can have 40 hectares of deciduous fruits and still not make any money selling his apples in South Africa, right? So we need to look at that, and then, please guys, training is important, but let us stop training for the sake of training. Yeah. I made that statement at a CETA, right, and they're still not talking to me, by the way. At the Jobs Fund, we don't pay for training, simply so that we can train somebody, right? We train so that it can lead to an outcome that is beneficial to that person. If there's no job, I mean, what you're training him for? So we need to be cleverer in how we spend our money. And thank you very much. Sorry,
Thanks,
Chair.
Thanks, Nasim. Grant, just to close off, there was a question asked by someone in the audience yesterday when Diana did a presentation on the One Farm Share model. How does One Farm Share look at the current model as it stands, right? It's empowering women within the various sectors, right? But then how do you then put preventative mechanisms or ensure that there isn't a dependency? So if you can just in summary,
Okay, perfect.
close
Thanks,
off
everyone.
in
Yes.
that aspect.
Lots has been said the last few days about the challenges, and the challenges are big. They are big challenges, but fortunately, there's lots of will, capital wanting to actually solve those. And I think what I'd like to add is some answers and possible solutions to those. And in fact, I'll tackle them from a digital perspective, and I'll tackle them from a pragmatic perspective. So, and just to demonstrate that, let me just tell you a little story that some of you may know, but some of you may have heard back in the late sort of 90s, Microsoft started a business called Encarta. And in fact, if you talk to younger people, they don't even know about Encarta. But in fact, Microsoft put absolutely billions into really taking what was Encyclopedia Britannica. So some of you may have remembered there were those books. When I was small, I used to go to the sort of local library and used to see the books there. But in fact, Encarta is now dead. It died back in 2009. And what's taken over? Wikipedia. And Wikipedia is entirely free. And it's entirely crowd-sourced. And it's entirely digital. And it beat the power of the most valuable company in the world. I think it's the 5th or 6th now, but it used to be the most valuable, because of the power of collective collaboration through digital technology. And that's really what it's done. It's brought billions and billions of dollars down to its knees. Now, when we talk about the financialization of agricultural markets, there's more and more capital in the world, private and other capital, going into commercial entities, which makes it harder and harder for smallholder farmers to compete because they've got bigger deals, funds, etc., etc. And ultimately, the way that smallholder farmers, we actually believe, can really effectively compete is through leveraging digitization to help coordination. So one of the things we focus very hard on is market access. As an online market access to say is if in fact a small producer can get to buyers digitally cheaper, quicker, more efficiently, they're able to compete more effectively. Okay. Buyers who want to access them and if they want to in fact aggregate can do so much more effectively through digital technologies. Some of the other aspects we spoke about, sharing of information and know-how knowledge. There's so much information and knowledge, but it's hard for farmers to access that. Digitally, we can make that available. How, in fact, we can provide access to finance. Digitally, we can make it so much more available. So ultimately, one of the major leveraging points that is going to help smallholder farmers commercialize and be sustainable is a coherent approach to use digital technologies as a way to bring down some of the barriers. Tebogo spoke about some of the barriers. You've actually touched on them. Ultimately, digital technologies, and in fact, from our perspective, it is really an open invitation for parties interested in the development of smallholder farmers to take hands, to collectively use these technologies to really bring down those barriers and create a flourishing smallholder farming sector, which is very much driven by women. Women are at the forefront. When in fact we go out into the farming areas, communities, the women are on the forefront. They are on the front line in terms of agricultural development, community development, and in fact we really, really need to support them with everything we do.
Thanks, Grant, and thanks to all the panelists. Quite an informative discussion, drawing from the barriers of entry to markets and looking at the opportunities that are there for us to unlock and some models of unlocking these resources. Yes, I think we need to wrap up and... Yes, we can only take 3 questions. There's a question over there.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I'm Kwaita's tutor again. I'm going to be very quick. My question is on Nasim, on Jobs Fund. I just want to check the support that you are giving. Is it a loan or a grant or a combination of both? If it's a loan, what is the percentage of the interest when you return the loan? And how long does it take before the loan must be repaid back? And the second one, in terms of your presentation, you are referring to the fact that you are only supporting intermediaries. You don't deal with individual companies. And you also reflected on the 16,000 that you also supported. Those 16,000, were they part of the intermediaries? And I want to check as well because I'm having my own company and I'm with women that are women farmers as well. But we all belong under NAFCOC, which is an organization. So when we apply for this funding, we don't apply as individual women in business. We apply as an organization. And this organization will be serving as an intermediary. That is what I want to know. Otherwise, thank you very much. I like your comment which was saying support cannot be an event. It's very true, meaning that you have to grow with the person and see that it is at a certain level. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Pio Gushle Shabango. I wanted to ask Grant, you had said that you would just unpack from a digital perspective and a pragmatic perspective. I'm not sure if you covered the pragmatic part. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark Wegerer for University of Pretoria. I'll just address the presentation from Tebogo. Thanks for all the presentations. It seems clear, Tebogo, from what you presented, that trying to fit in with this model of so-called commercial chicken production is just not going to work for the majority. I mean, you made it very absolutely clear it's not going to work. And therefore, it would seem clear we should be looking at other alternatives. You did the analysis of that type of production, that form of production. You told us minimum numbers like 40,000 chickens and so on. Even with your own solution, like contract farming, you said, well, there's this unequal terms of trade, doesn't necessarily work for people and so on. So to me, the interesting thing is that you've told us absolutely clearly there is no point, and it's a waste of time and effort trying to get small farmers into that system. Even if they're in, they're going to be squeezed. And you also hinted on this hide thing. Actually, in the informal production, what you called informal and you called non-commercial, they have much better margins. And we know, and I've seen the figures, that the margins in the so-called commercial production you're talking about are extremely narrow. The margins and the profitability in your small so-called non-commercial are much better, and the profitability is better. So we shouldn't, all of your solutions, contract farming, aggregation, industry knowledge, are not going to overcome the structural problems that you so clearly set out for us. So we should look for alternatives. We should look for autonomy from that system that, as you said, is controlled from the very genetic material that two companies own more than 90% of globally. It's not even in South Africa, right through to the seed and the feed and all of that that's there. So we should look at autonomous circuits, different genetic material, different production models. So I suppose my question to you, I'm obviously making a point, but also my question to you would be the extent to which you looked then at that other model. Because we have farmers, and I go to villages and townships and I see the live chickens being sold on the side of the road, with all the legs and everything, less than what I can buy them in the supermarket. And I know that chicken farmers making a better margin. So have you looked at that model? And to what extent shouldn't we promote and extend and replicate that model, where farmers are actually making more money with less stress from that smaller production? Thanks.
Okay. John, thank you for the question. The Jobs Fund only provides grant funding. Okay, we are funded by National Treasury. Now, when we fund an intermediary, obviously, we require that intermediary to raise additional funding so we can help more people, right? Because remember, government's resources is finite. So the more money we can generate and bring in from the private sector to match us, the more money we have available. Now, what happens to those money when to the ultimate beneficiary, like yourself, is dependent on the model itself. We have funded models where we provide a grant to an institution. That money is then provided as a grant to the beneficiary as well. We have funded grant funding where it is blended with commercial funding, and the purpose then is to reduce the cost of capital to the beneficiary simply by providing the grant. So that's basically, so we do both. The funding to the Jobs Fund is not repayable to us. It may be repayable to the project itself, so that project then becomes sustainable, right? Because everybody requires grant funding. Everybody wants grant funding. And certain part of the beneficiary universe can only survive on grant funding. But as you grow, you cannot be grant funded from, if you got one chicken coop, sure, you need grant funding to set it up. But if you want to go from 1 to 10 or 100 to become commercially viable, surely we cannot be using grant funding for that, because it then limits the amount of people we can help. Okay? So all depends on that, but it depends on the model. The Jobs Fund provides a grant, and it is not repayable to the grant. It will remain in that project and recycled continuously to help more people. Yes, we use intermediaries, and the reason for that is the Jobs Fund is a funder. We don't have the skill, we don't have the reach, particularly in the various regions in South Africa, to be able to help farmers directly, right? We don't have the technical skill to train a farmer, etc. So that is why we use intermediaries. So where's the reach? And the 16,000 farmers has largely, 99% probably of those has been done via intermediaries, right? So you're right, NAFCOC would be the applicant. It's far easier for us to contract with NAFCOC, help them help the people who is affiliated to NAFCOC, than help NAFCOC individual members. All right?
Thanks, thanks.
Thank you.
Amin. I think we have a minute. I've been told that we have to wrap up.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah, maybe I can deal just with some practical, you're right, we didn't deal with the practical some items, and maybe I'll just use two particular examples. So one, for instance, is one of the challenges that smallholder farmers doing vegetables, for instance, is around packaging. Really by actually solving some of the packaging challenges, working with partners like One Farm Share or various other entities, they're able then to suddenly now access commercial markets they weren't able to access before. Because suddenly if you're going to sell to a small retailer or something of that sort, it's got to be packed in a bag, it's got to be well cleaned, etc. So kind of just a practical solution around packaging, and kind of what happens is, like typically we call that being actually market ready. So there's a lot of work that goes into production and seed, etc. But in fact, if you don't do some practical things to be market ready, it makes it very, very difficult. A second component around aggregation. So working actually collectively, and we've done this where 7 or 8 farmers in a particular area will then aggregate together, so we can then move that load out efficiently, effectively. Also, a practical example where we've actually contracted in a farmer close by who's got transport. That farmer's now got a secondary income. He's now actually got a fleet that he can charge out that they can use, and suddenly we've sorted a transport solution. So suddenly working, so practically thinking outside the box, working actually together, solving solutions together, you can really solve these issues practically. So lots of issues we're talking about are very big issues. They're policy issues and financial issues, etc. But there are lots of practical things we can do, working collectively, sharing our know-how, that in fact can actually move us forward. And it's really step by step that in fact we cover that 100 steps.
Thank you. Can you please give a round of applause to the panelists? Mark, can you please engage with Tebogo during lunch?
Thank you.
Thank you.